I'm gonna be straight out. When I started listening to you and Michael Rood, I did exactly what you said everybody does. I went and shook the family tree and tried to see if a Jew would fall out. So I kind of checked, and I think it might be there. I checked my everybody in my grandparents and my parents. I checked all the last names, and I'm not sure if you knew about this, but during the Inquisition in Spain, how they told all the Jews to leave. Well, apparently, if you were a family that was asked to leave, you can now claim Spanish citizenship.
Really?
And, yeah, and I was looking at the paper, and all my family names were on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here, I want to talk about the Inquisition for a minute, because I've had people say, "Oh, the Inquisition, that was 500 years ago." I literally read this somewhere online once, that there was a Jew who was Sephardic, and they were saying, how could it be Sephardic? And Sephardic could be translated as Spanish, meaning from Sfarad, and more specifically Iberia, right? Meaning not Spanish from Latin America. How could it be Sephardic? That was 500 years ago. His grandmother must be 500 years old. And that's not what Sephardic means. Sephardic today, well, it has a number of definitions, but the main definition is Jews whose ancestors were in the Iberian Peninsula, which could be Spain or Portugal, or today is Spain and Portugal, and they either fled and it was over a long period of time. So one of the early persecutions was in, I want to say it was 1397, and then and there was another, the big one that everybody knows about was 1492. Here's what people don't know. In 1860, in Barcelona, there was somebody who was born into the Catholic Church, baptized in the Catholic Church, and secretly practicing Judaism. And they were hauled out into the public square, had what's called an auto de fe, which is basically like a church trial, and they were burned at the stake. Whoa. Not in 1460, not in 1560, that happened then too, but in 1860 is the last documented auto de fe where they burned a Jew who was living openly as a Catholic, but secretly as a Jew, was still being burned at the stake in 1860. Think about that. Now, what year was your grandparent born in? I don't know if you know off the top of your head. I'm trying to think if I know.
Oh, yeah,
my grandmother was born in 1913, if I remember correctly. 1860 would have been her grandmother. That's not that long ago, right? So go back 5-6 generations, and you had people who were secretly practicing Judaism, and there were life and death consequences if they were caught. Well, that's hard. That's mind-boggling. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more recent incidents. There was someone like about 100 years ago who went through these archives in Spain, and that's what he found. I bet if somebody went through the archives today, they would find more recent incidents. That's not my expertise, but they kept really good records, and a lot of those records are still around in Spain. So we're in the Spanish Empire, right? And you had people who were being burned at the stake in the Philippines.
In the Philippines?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it's part of the Spanish Empire.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine this. So here's what happens. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But the thing that happened in Jewish history,
he was a Jew, right?
I don't know if
he was a secret Jew.
I don't know of any evidence that really supports that, but they say his navigator was definitely a secret Jew, or what they called a new Christian. Right, a new Christian was somebody whose ancestors or himself was forced to convert to Christianity, but they still continued to practice conversos. They still continued to practice some form of Judaism in secret. So, for example, in his, I believe it's the logbook of Christopher Columbus Navigator, he uses Hebrew letters. Yeah. Why is he using the Hebrew letters? Because he's more familiar with that alphabet, right? He probably learned math or mathematics using Hebrew characters. So 1492, they say to the Jews in Spain, and just put this in perspective, at the time, Spain had the center of Judaism in the entire world, right? It was the intellectual and population center of Judaism in the entire world, was in the Iberian Peninsula. So Spain is reunited after conquering Grenada, and they say, we got rid of the Muslims, now let's get rid of the Jews. And they have that's really what happened. And they issue an edict which says either convert or leave. And some people said, they want me to be sprinkled with some water. Who cares? I'm going to continue practicing Judaism in my house, but I'm not going to give up everything I've had with my family. I'm in a home where my family has lived for 500 years, maybe since Roman times. The family had lived in that house and had that business that they were passing on from father to son. They said, I'm going to stay here. People kind of do what they want in Spain anyway. Well, they didn't know the Inquisition was coming. I guess they should have known. But or maybe they did know. I don't know. There were some people who said, I'm going to convert to Catholicism openly, but I'll continue to secretly practice Christianity. Secretly practice Judaism. What people don't realize, some people don't realize, is that the Inquisition wasn't against Jews. It was against Christians, or more precisely, people they considered Christians. Mm-hmm. People they considered to be under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. That's who was under the threat of the Inquisition. So it was the Jews who said, all right, I'll just go through the motions and I'll formally convert to Catholicism. It's just sprinkling with water. It doesn't mean anything. And then years later, they or their descendants are burned at the stake because they're continuing to secretly practice Judaism. So a lot of the Jews said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave. So where did they go? They went to Portugal, which had the doors open. They said, hey, we'd love to have you. That was in 1492. Well, in 1497, the Portuguese monarch comes under pressure from the Catholic Church, and he says, look, this is kind of awkward. I've got hundreds of thousands of Jews. And he puts a different ultimatum. He says, convert or die.
Oh.
And in some instances, it's not even convert or die. He gathers the Jews into the public square in Lisbon, and he has these monks sprinkle water on them. And he says, now you're Christians. You've now entered into the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. If you go and don't work this Saturday, you're going to be burned at the stake. So it wasn't anything that even consciously said, oh, okay, I'll pretend to be Christian and really be Jewish. It was, they were literally sprinkled with water.
So he forcefully put them under the authority of the Catholic Church so they would have the authority to do this. Wow, right. So I didn't know that.
Spain was convert or leave, and Portugal was convert or die. So the point is that you have people who were forcibly converted. So in some cases, they didn't even do anything. They were sprinkled with water, and they were told, now you're a Catholic.
Wow,
that's generations later, their descendants would say, in my house, we don't eat pork. And for some reason, we light candles on Friday night. We don't actually know why. And for some reason, we, do certain things. And there's actually a really interesting example of this. So there was a saint among the descendants of the Jews who were forced to convert to Catholicism, a saint that is pretty much unknown otherwise in the Catholic world, called Saint Esther. And it was a way that they would teach their descendants about certain Jewish values, right? They had to wrap it in a Catholic veneer, this Catholic, cloak, right? And so it's not Esther, the queen of the book of, it is, right? She's from the book of Esther, but they call her, we'll call her a saint, Saint Esther, and they would convey certain Jewish ideas. Well, the Catholic Church wasn't entirely stupid. They could see there were people who were doing things different, and they were persecuting those people for centuries. When you were caught, you were burned at the stake. And I've seen the documents. Wow. I've held them in my hands. Wow. What do I mean by the documents? The Catholic Church was proud of this. What they would do is they would publish a document that said, this person is being burned at the stake on, Tuesday, March 5th, whatever, 1849. I don't know the exact dates, right? But they would give an exact date and the exact crime. And one of the crimes was Judaismo, which is Judaizing. Right, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but I think I've actually seen the Portuguese version of this, right? So apparently I don't know. It basically meant Judaizing. What's Judaizing? Your neighbor had a dispute with you, and they went to the local Catholic priest and said, that my neighbor over there who owes me money, he didn't, he doesn't work on Friday night after sunset. And he won't eat pork on Christmas or whatever it is, right? And they're like, wait, why isn't he eating pork on Christmas? What's going on here? and they go interrogate the people, and they find out they're secretly practicing some remnant of Judaism, and they burn them at the stake. And meanwhile, the neighbor now steals his sheep and everything
even if they didn't know about it, because I'm sure a lot of it was handed down, and like
100%.
I know things are handed down, and you don't even know what you're doing.
In some cases, they did know what they're doing, and in some cases, they didn't. Right? In some cases, you have Jews showing up. Really, I mean, you have people who are nominally Catholic showing up in Holland in like 1750 and 1650 and saying, you know, my ancestor was one of those Jews from 1497 in Portugal. And in one of the earliest synagogues, if not the earliest synagogue in New York City, was founded by Portuguese Jews who were descendants of these conversos, right? So they end up going to Holland, and then from because Holland had freedom of religion. It had been a Spanish colony, a Spanish province. They rebelled, and one of the things they said is, you know, we're rebelling because we want to be Protestants. We should give freedom of religion to everybody. And so they actually is one of the first places in Europe to give freedom of religion to Jews is the Netherlands, right? Holland. And then some of those end up going to New Amsterdam. They weren't like the New Amsterdam because the people were anti-Semitic, but they're like, okay, we can't do anything about it. You're free to practice your Jewish faith, right? Now, these were people whose great-great-grandfather was baptized into the Catholic Church because he had no choice.
This is right after the Mayflower and all that?
I can't tell you. I think it's in the 1600s, so I'm bad with the American history dates. Yeah. But people can fact check me and Google this. It's in sometime in the 1600s, if memory serves me, where you have descendants. As soon as the Christians came, so did the Jews. What's that?
So, like right after the Christians came over here to colonize, came some Jews.
Well, I think the Christians were here a little bit before that. In other words, the Spanish came much earlier, right? The Spanish are coming in, the beginning of the 1500s. There, I don't know when the first colony was in North America. I know that when the first British colony, this is crazy. I read this and I couldn't believe it. When the first British colony was established in North America, there was already a hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
What?
Like, think about that. That's crazy. But that's how long the Spanish were in North America, right? Wow. But there are Jews or people who are descendants of Jews who are coming and thinking, you know, I'm persecuted here in my little village because everybody knows my great-great-great-great-grandfather was Jewish. If I go to Nuevo Leon in New Spain, which is today Mexico, people won't know who I am, and they'll kind of leave me alone. And they did. There were a lot of people, and that's how they end up burning people at the stake in Manila, in the Philippines in the 1800s, because they're like, wait a minute, you're not allowed to do that. That's not what a good Catholic does. And the Inquisition ends up following these Jews into what today is Mexico and Spain and Colombia and various other places.
So it was the church keeping track of people, like, oh, this guy's descended from a Jew, and the church was just keeping records of all.
Well, how did you find out that your ancestor was possibly Jewish from your name? So they did the same thing. Well, so they had the Catholic Church kept really good records, and they say, oh, your name is Cortez. Well, we know there's some people who are named Cortez who are descended from converts to from Judaism to Christianity to Catholicism.
Well, apparently,
keep an eye on you.
Apparently, a lot of people that were trying to evade being known as Jews changed their name, but added an EZ at the end to signify Eres Zion.
Right. Well, I don't know about that. That's not my expertise. That's very possible. I know the Catholic Church was able to figure it out. And often it was some neighbor who didn't like you who would rat you out, right? Yes. And sometimes maybe they were lying and said you didn't work on Saturday and you really did. And the burden of proof is on you, right? It's not like you're having a fair trial from the Catholic Church.